In the previous video, I left you with a puzzle to solve. A very dear friend, and indeed a very huge supporter of the Kumekucha brand, known as iSafaricom. Yeah, of course, that's not his real name. But that is what he uses in our Telegram chat room. Yeah, the Telegram chat room. He was key in establishing. Anyway, this friend said, Chris, the suspense is too much. Yeah, I can't wait for you to break it down for us. I imagine those who came to a conclusion kept it to themselves. Yeah, they didn't comment in the comment area or anywhere else. Anyway, on today's show, I shall solve that mystery for you and break it down. Because indeed, it is not good news for Africa. It seems that the continent is being targeted, or rather was targeted from the first day. Yeah. But then there are other very huge upcoming implications, which I'll deal with on this show today. But first, let's start with politics. There is a man called Mr. Caleb Kositany, or rather Honorable Caleb Kositany. He is the Deputy Secretary General of the Jubilee Party and a very camera-shy person. He never talks to the press. During press conferences, he keeps his mouth shut, etc., etc. And the result is, even the firmest supporters of the Jubilee Party don't know him. Yeah, when you mention the name Caleb Kositany, they say, who is that? But I'm sure the constituents of Soy in the Rift Valley definitely know him, because he's the member of parliament. This man is definitely not an Oscar Sudi or Kipchumba Murkomen. But he has written a letter that has quite some accusations. And even if you don't like Team Tanga, because this man is a firm supporter of the Deputy President, obviously, from the Rift Valley, there is no way you can just brush aside what he's saying. Because being Deputy Secretary General of the party is definitely an insider. Now, he said many things, but what stood out for me was that he says the three members who were replaced in the National Management Committee of the Jubilee Party, that is Ms. Shukri, Ms. Mutua, and Ms. Maina, have never been members of the NMC. What? And he continues, and therefore their purported replacement is fraudulent and fictitious. Now, what is going on inside the Jubilee Party? What is this Mr. Kositany is telling us? That people who are not members in the first place were replaced. Well, I guess that is what you can call political scheming, which, as dirty as it is normal in politics. And I can hear some of you telling me, Chris, how can you say that? Well, let me repeat again. It is very important, that you realize that this is national politics. It is not standard 8 elections for a class prefect. It's not even high school elections for anything. Therefore, this thing of, this was unfair, that was unfair. If you were to approach your political analysis that way, you'd spend the whole day talking about fair and unfair, which have zero impact on what ends up happening politically. And I'm not saying it is good to play dirty in politics. What I'm saying is that this is politics. Therefore, analyze it as politics, not as primary school elections or primary school politics prior to an election. Now, something very fishy that suggests that Bwana Kositany may not be lying. He's the Deputy Secretary General, he can't be lying, but let's just assume that he's also playing dirty, by lying. But one fishy thing in this Jubilee manenos, that may suggest that Kositany is not lying, is the fact that 3 officials were replaced by not 3, they were replaced by 5. Now let us put on our thinking caps for a minute. Why would you want to replace 3 people on a crucial committee, decision-making committee, with 5? Well, the possible answer is obvious. You want a majority in that National Management Committee, because the assumption is that when you don't all agree on something, you'll have to put it to the vote. So you take the hypothetical situation where you're overwhelmed, in case people vote, you know that so and so will vote against what you want. Therefore, to adjust the arithmetic, you replace 3 who don't exist with 5. You've actually increased your vote in that committee by 5. Pop! And then you do this, at the height of the fight against the virus, when people are not paying attention. All that makes perfect sense. Although we don't know, and I need to emphasize this, we don't have any evidence to conclusively prove that this is what happened. But this is normal in politics. And what makes it even more fascinating for neutral observers like myself is the fact that all these manenos started with those changes. And those changes were being made because the Jubilee Party is preparing for elections. And naturally, the National Management Committee will play a major and key role in preparing the party for those elections, deciding how voting will happen, etc., etc. Now, it is very interesting and indeed very instructive that DP Ruto and Team Tanga have chosen a man who was previously quiet, Honorable Caleb Kositany, to be at the forefront of this new battle between Team Keleweke and Team Tanga. It is interesting because Kositany is the Deputy Secretary General of the party. And Kositany, in his assault, is not firing aimlessly. His firing is very targeted. His shots are very targeted. And they're targeted at the party Secretary General, Rafael Tuju, and the chairman, another camera shy, indeed more camera shy than Bwana Kositany, the party chairman called Nelson Zuya. Now, this is much more effective than unleashing Oscar Sudi to start shooting his mouth in a press conference somewhere. Everybody will say, this is the usual Jubilee noise. Which means that the tactics, strategy, and approach of Team Tanga, in my view, have improved dramatically. And I know firm supporters of Tanga will say, no, Chris, you're wrong. It's just that we have changed our tactics. Now, what all this does is that it sets the stage for a very serious, unprecedented political battle within the Jubilee Party. Indeed, I dare say, this move by Kositany and those behind him has effectively cornered the powerful Rafael Tuju and David Murathe. That is the truth. Just think about it. Assuming our hypothesis, our assumptions are correct, and you are Rafael Tuju, what would you do? The other side has always been daring you to hold a National Executive Committee meeting. You're not interested. And now you have a fast approaching deadline, and you need to call for party elections. But before that, the National Management Committee must meet. What do you do? And you know you don't have the numbers on that committee. The other side has. Actually, there's only one thing to do. And this one will shock you to your bones. I kid you not. Because the truth of the matter, and I'm being very neutral in analyzing this, so please, Team Keleweke, don't throw stones. The truth is, a faction of the Jubilee Party is in more serious trouble than the party was before the handshake in March 2018. It is much more cornered. Now, of course, you can say that Rafael Tuju and company can just walk out of the Jubilee Party. Well, that one can also be done, but it will not work. It will not work if your objective is a merger between the Jubilee Party and ODM. First of all, there's the huge investment, which most people often underestimate, that has gone into building the Jubilee Party to be the largest political party in the country at the moment. And walking away from your investment, going to spend more money right now in this climate and environment, is not practical. The economy is in trouble. There's no money. And to make matters worse, this virus has come and has caused havoc. So trust me, that is not an option. The much better option is for Rafael Tuju and company to call a truce and to make amends with Deputy President William Samoei Ruto. And of course, Ruto and company will have demands, which will have to be negotiated. But that is the only way. Now, what this would mean is that the Deputy President would now have to be part and parcel of the handshake. But we know that he'll do everything in his power to weaken the force of that handshake. And therefore, what this means is that a man called Raila Odinga will find himself on the receiving end of these developments within the Jubilee Party. Ultimately, he will. And this also explains why Raila Odinga, who's a very experienced politician, has recently issued statements and said words that have pulled him into the problems within Jubilee. Well, he just said that there are people within Jubilee who have always been against the handshake from day one, and that is the cause of the problems within Jubilee. And that looks reasonable and innocent enough, but this is politics. And in politics, you never ever come anywhere near the internal affairs of another political outfit. You just don't. So my advice, watch very carefully the developments within Jubilee. This is not just a petty squabble. No. It is a squabble that has far-reaching, very major possible consequences on our entire political landscape. Right. Let us now move to the topic we started with. The best detectives in the world use this very effective technique we're using of doing a recap to catch villains. Because a recap gives you a bird's eye view, enables you to see things you'd never have seen in the heat of those events unfolding. Many times, it will give you something else very important, the motive, which you'll be able to very easily see from the pattern that develops. So let's get down to it, and let's start by replaying, that clip that I showed you in the previous video. And then I will quickly break it down for you, and reach the shocking conclusion, which in my view is extremely scary. So let's do it. Now, long before this crisis started, with the benefit of hindsight, we can now understand why it was so terribly important to ensure that the Secretary General of the World Health Organization comes from the continent of Africa. It is quite possible the reason was to legitimize what was going to be done on the continent of Africa. What? Now, at the beginning of this crisis, I was totally amazed and taken aback by the number of cameras from the international press, foreign journalists, very much in anticipation of something that was about to happen in Africa that nobody else seemed to be aware of. I mentioned this in a video at the time. This was around March 13th, when the country announced its very first case. Remember that? Now, journalists have access, and they're observant. And so if the government is hiding anything, they're bound to see it. Although that is not always true. The government is also powerful and can hide deaths from the virus and ensure that people are mostly in the dark. And so when the casualties from the virus did not come in large enough numbers to make good footage for primetime news in the West, we suddenly heard of accusations from the World Health Organization that our government was not reporting the figures correctly. They were fiddling with the figures, not revealing the number of deaths, which in itself is very strange when you come to think of it, because the World Health Organization is supposed to promote its success in health issues. The natural reaction one would have expected, natural human reaction, would have been relief. Even if they suspected that the numbers were being hidden, they should have said something like, we're very happy that the situation is under control in Africa. And it's because we have taken action. We have advised African governments, etc., etc. But they didn't do that. Instead, they were crying for dead bodies. In Africa, they were demanding for them. And that is why I'm tempted to believe that Africa was supposed to be used as a major part in their script to put fear in human beings. When they saw what is happening in Africa, they would get even more scared, go into a lockdown much quicker, and therefore ultimately accept mass vaccination much quicker without anybody raising their voice against it. That is my theory, which neatly fits into this and explains their very strange behavior. And the prediction of deaths in Africa continued. And at this juncture, we need to ask ourselves a very simple question. What went wrong? These are very smart people. Make no mistake about that. Therefore, whatever they had done, they were expecting results, which did not come. So what happened? What stopped those results from emerging? I'm afraid for now, that remains a mystery. Although those who pray say that they believe there was divine intervention. But not all of us pray. Most of us are scientific. And we believe that science is superior to Almighty God. Although the truth is, God Almighty created science himself. Anyway, let's not argue over that point. Let's move on. But we must all acknowledge that things should have been bad in Kenya. Our close links with China. Flights were coming in all the time from China. There was nobody at the airport to ask those Chinese coming to the country, what province of China are you from? Are you from Wuhan? There was nobody. So, if there was going to be trouble in Africa, Kenya should have been an epicenter of that trouble. If you want to look at the science. But it didn't happen. And that explains the puzzling behavior and response of the World Health Organization. They're asking, why? you guys must be fiddling with the figures. There's something wrong here. Meaning that they're expecting something. Yeah? And for them to expect something, they must have been sure that something had happened. Yeah, let me not accuse anybody. They must have been sure that something had happened, and therefore they're expecting high number of casualties in Kenya. Well, it didn't happen. Then the next thing that was promoted are tests. Yeah, Africa is not doing enough testing. And we started receiving huge donations of test kits. Now, step back for a minute and think about that more deeply. Resources are always in short supply. And even if you have plenty of resources, the wise thing is to use them cautiously, to use them in the most effective way, so that your resources have maximum impact in what you want to achieve. I think we agree on that one. So you have a country where people are not falling on the streets, dead, from the virus. But you fear there could be an outbreak at any time, any minute. Now, here's what I'd do to make the most effective use of the limited resources. I would curtail movement, close all borders of all counties, and wait so that it is easy to contain it wherever it breaks out. And then keep your testing kits for those who show symptoms, symptoms that are suspect. In Kenya, as of yesterday, there was a total of 6,000 people who had been tested. And out of those, only 216 had been found to be positive to the virus. Less than 5%. Now, let me ask you a question. Does it make sense in that kind of environment and with that kind of scientific results to start talking about people who are walking around with the virus but do not have any symptoms? Does it make any sense to you? Because it doesn't make any sense to me. Correct me where I'm wrong, because I can be corrected. Now, there's some information I cannot share here because it is not verified, and this is highly sensitive information. Therefore, I want us to hypothesize, look at a theory, no evidence, just a theory. If your end game was to vaccinate everybody on the continent, or as many people as possible, and your plan A was that people would pass away all over the place, fall dead on the streets, etc., etc., and that didn't happen. Now, in that situation, wouldn't the perfect plan B be to have increased numbers of people testing positive, as many as possible, and that would justify vaccination? Would it not? And I'm sure it would not matter if that number, huge number of people test positive, it would not matter if over 90% or even over 95% did not show any symptoms. It wouldn't matter. Anyway, let's move on. Now, this latest developments in China, where Africans are being harassed and discriminated against, seems to be forcing a certain result. And that result is forcing African countries to evacuate as many of their nationals as possible from China. And remember, although people are talking about a second wave, it would seem that China is coming out of this. The worst is over for China. And we also know that some of the most prominent personalities behind this virus are people who have been campaigning for a long time for a reduction of population on the face of the earth. Now, we also know that Africa is very populated, and it is populated with undesirables in the eyes of many of these people. I think you know what I mean. And what that tells you is that right from the beginning, Africa must have been the main target. Most of the casualties were projected and expected to come from Africa. And we're still in agreement that it's a mystery why that has not happened. Bottom line, it is very clear, crystal clear, looking at the timelines and the chain of events, that Africa is a main target, on the crosshairs of those behind this thing. And we have seen their frustrations at the fact that what they wanted to happen has not happened. And that should make us very worried. There are many ways population can decrease in Africa. Disease, lack of medicine, and we know that this crisis has caused major supply hiccups. And we already know that pneumonia is a major problem on our continent, a major killer. And then we know something else very frightening. A large chunk of those who live in Africa live from hand to mouth. To put it simply, they need to go out every day in order to put food on the table. And so, when a large part of the continent is on partial lockdown, and some of it is on total lockdown, you know what's going to happen next? Hunger, starvation. And so there are many ways, those who would like the population of the world to be reduced, for them to reduce the numbers in Africa. And of course it would help a great deal if those Africans who are out of the continent returned to the continent, returned to where they came from. And you just can't tell them to leave. The Swahili have a saying, akufukuzae akwambi nenda. In other words, if somebody wants to chase you away from their home, not many will come and tell you, leave my house. The vast majority will prefer to do things that will frustrate you, make it very uncomfortable for you to continue living in their house, so that at the end, you're forced to leave. Objective achieved. And don't get confused. I'm well aware that it has always been very uncomfortable for Africans in China. They have always been discriminated against. But they have not been forced out of their homes before. That has never happened before. You've paid your rent, you have your house, you've invested in furniture in your house, etc., etc. Somebody forces you out of that house and you sleep on the street, although you have a house. You need to eat, and therefore you go to the supermarket. But you cannot be allowed to enter the supermarket, because previously there are many clubs, entertainment spots, that did not allow Africans. Well, that's okay, that's not essential. But here is the case where you cannot have access to food because you can't enter the supermarket. And so you'll struggle to find food elsewhere today and maybe tomorrow. But you'll reach that point where you'll no longer be able to access food. And so you have no option but to eagerly want to leave the country. And at the moment, Europe and other parts of the world are not accepting visitors. So you have no option but to go back to Mother Africa. And that's the whole objective. Folks, open your eyes. Keep your science and keep your scientific analysis. That's okay, I have no problem with that. But open your eyes before it is too late. We have no option, absolutely no option, but to unite as the people of Africa. And when we unite, we'll be strong, stronger even than the gatekeepers of our country, our leaders, many of whom have been compromised, and will take action and do things that are not in our best interests. Now, it is also true, this is a fact, that some of our leaders who may want to do what is good for the country at the moment may not be in that position because there's so much pressure on them to follow the instructions from the West blindly. Lock down the city, lock down the entire country. Yeah, and those people who are telling you to do this are not telling you how you're going to feed your people. They are not ready to sign a contract and put it in writing that they'll feed your entire population until the day the lockdown ends. Nobody's prepared to do that. And I suspect not many countries have the financial power to do that. Yeah, because the virus has taken its toll on economies worldwide. No country is untouched. For the sake of those who are still asleep, yeah, let me recount a recent incident in the UK where a family took their father, 93 years old, to a hospital. And they called that hospital and spoke to a nurse who had just come on duty. And the nurse told them the father was okay, all the vitals were okay. But then moments later, a few hours later, they were told to come and bid their father goodbye. And those who told them assumed that they didn't know anything scientific. And so they confessed that they were injecting him with morphine. And yet, they also knew that he had a kidney problem. And therefore, the highest possibility was that he would die. Yeah, because by feeding him morphine, they'd just be killing him. Many people would not have that information. I wouldn't have had that information. But some of this family did. And they challenged them on the phone. And moments later, their dad passed on. You know, I can't help but imagine that some evil people are lurking in these hospitals. I can just imagine them saying, oh, he's black. Oh, African. Oh, that's very good. And you say he has breathing problems. Are you sure? This is very good. Oh, and I see he has kidney issues. Oh, this is lovely. Just go and feed him with a lot of morphine. You can start preparing the death certificate. Yeah, of course you know what to put there, right? Good, done. Next case? My brother, my sister, wake up! Even if you like to sleep, surely you can sleep later after this crisis has passed. Do you think that it's a coincidence that when all this is unfolding, we also have a very high incidence amongst black communities in the Western world? And we also have a high number of casualties amongst blacks who are health workers. In the UK, in the US. Now I know some of you have a logical explanation, which is okay. But stop for a minute and don't look at that in isolation. Link it to what is happening everywhere. And if you still think it's a coincidence, I pity you. I thank Almighty God, the God of Isaac, Jacob, and Abraham, for what he has done for Africa so far, and what he will still do for his beloved continent. And I will continue to use the very lethal weapon I have, called prayer. And I highly recommend that you do the same. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.